As I'm sure you're aware, it was announced last night that Darren Wilson would not be indicted in connection with the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson just a few months ago. That announcement was provided by Robert McCulloch, the Ferguson prosecutor. Although as you watch the videos we're going to run for you, it seems incredibly hard to even imagine that he merits that title as prosecutor as opposed to defense attorney. Here is the first of several clips of Robert McCulloch.
The duty of the grand jury is to separate fact from fiction. It is important to note here and say again that they are the only people who have heard and examined every witness and every piece of evidence. They determined that no probable cause exists to file any charge against Officer Wilson and returned a no true bill on each of the 5 indictments.
Yeah, they determined, as if he was not involved in that determination in any way.
You know, first of all, the duty of the grand jury is not to separate fact from fiction. Mm-hmm. The duty of the grand jury is to hear the prosecution's case and determine whether they should issue an indictment.
So he got the basic facts of the duty of a grand jury wrong in a public statement.
In the public statement, before he even made this announcement. This is back before he'd even announced to people that Darren Wilson wasn't going to be indicted.
He delayed the actual announcement
so he could complain about the media.
Boy, I bet when he finds out that he got that wrong, he's going to be pretty embarrassed.
You can understand how he would have missed that, though, since he's only been doing this for over 2 decades.
You know, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have done some reading today about what a grand jury does, but I mean, his statement is essentially right if he's talking about a jury.
Yes.
A jury's job is to separate fact from fiction. The grand jury, again, just hears the prosecutor's case. Here's what you can't do if you're called before a grand jury. Have your lawyer in there with you. So this is, and what prosecutors never do, and we'll get to this, I'm not going to dive into it quite yet until we continue to go through this, but you know, they are in the process of doing a Frank Luntz type spin on this.
Yes.
And it's worked across the board because they are saying, first of all, he says the grand jury, McCulloch said in that bite, the grand jury was the only people to hear all the evidence. No, you've heard all the evidence, and every prosecutor in the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office involved in this
case. He doesn't seem very interested in it.
Yeah, so grand jury is not the only people to hear all the evidence. But they are going to do what lawyers frequently do all the time, especially big lawyers sued by, you know, a corporation sued by a small firm or sued by an employee who's been wronged. Whenever the power of the legal power of one side in a dispute far exceeds the other side, and sometimes when they're even, what they'll do when you subpoena documents or in the discovery process is you do what's called a document dump. And you give them the document they want, the smoking gun, the document, the memo sent by the CEO saying, let's short all these sales and not tell anyone. That way we'll make millions before the company goes under, right? And they include that memo because they're legally bound to include that memo, and they go to prison if they don't include that memo. But nothing says you can't include literally 1 million other memos in with it. Yeah. And then they say, good luck finding it.
Exactly.
Right. And what they did here was give the grand jury every piece of evidence, including, it would appear, some pieces of evidence that had nothing to do with the case, and certainly nothing to do with the prosecution. So they gave the grand jury overwhelming reasonable doubt in the case, and now we've already heard, and we'll hear later from Darren Wilson's friend on Fox News, we will hear from people who will say, they're getting on this guy and he gave him everything. Imagine what they'd say if they withheld evidence. That's what prosecutors do in front of grand juries withhold evidence, because the issue doesn't go before the grand jury, the defense attorney, ever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you've alluded to a number of great points that we're going to get to, but in the second one, so you talked about the...
Can I just, before you throw to that, can I just, maybe when people are watching this, it would be good for them to keep in mind, this is the prosecutor.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
That's why I said he doesn't deserve the title.
That's right.
And so you could easily make the mistake that this sounds exactly, I couldn't imagine a defense attorney making a stronger case for their client than this guy makes for Darren Wilson's innocence. So I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
It sounded like Zimmerman's defense attorney after they found that he wasn't guilty.
Yes.
Effectively, yeah. So you talked about how they're doing the spin in anticipation of even announcing the announcement. They hadn't even gotten to it yet. So in this second clip, you're going to hear him, the prosecutor, blaming all of these different groups, including the media, for stoking violence and chaos in Ferguson.
The most significant challenge encountered in this investigation has been the 24-hour news cycle and its insatiable appetite for something, for anything, to talk about, following closely behind with the nonstop rumors on social media. I recognize, of course, that the lack of accurate detail surrounding the shooting frustrates the media and the general public and helps breed suspicion among those already distrustful of the system. The law authorizes a law enforcement officer to use deadly force in certain situations. The law also allows all people to use deadly force to defend themselves in certain situations. So the grand jury considered whether Wilson was the initial aggressor in this case, or whether there was probable cause to believe that Darren Wilson was authorized as a law enforcement officer to use deadly force in this situation, or if he acted in self-defense. I detail this for two reasons. First, so that everyone will know that, as promised by me and Attorney General Holder, there was a full investigation and presentation of all evidence and appropriate instruction of law to the jury, to the grand jury. Second, as a caution to those in and out of the media who will pounce on a single sentence or a single witness and decide what should have happened in this case based on that tiny bit of information.
Again, does not sound at all like a prosecutor. He talks continually about all the evidence has been given, although coming out of this, we have still basic questions that have no answer. We might have answers as a result of a trial, but we're not going to have that apparently.
Darren Wilson, he made a great hire.
Yeah, I think so.
That guy really came through.
Yeah.
You know, right off the bat, this tells you this guy's a bad guy. I didn't know he was a bad guy until yesterday.
Yeah.
But he's a bad guy.
I had feelings.
I had a sense. The most significant challenge, he said, faced by the grand jury was the 24-hour media news cycle and then the rapid appetite of social media. I would imagine that a prosecutor with any kind of soul, and prosecutors who, I wanted to be a prosecutor for a long time, because I thought I had some sense of justice, and I would want justice for victims of crime, and I wanted people to feel safe, and I wanted big, powerful people to not to get away with stepping on the rights of little people. But I would have said that the biggest challenge in the case was making sure that justice was served. I would have used maybe the word justice for the biggest challenge. Making sure that we investigated fairly and fully the death of an unarmed black kid in Ferguson. And also I would have said, and making sure that in this environment that the rights of the accused were protected. That is always a difficult balance for us, but we sought justice from the start. And he thought what he'd open with was the biggest challenge here was freaking Twitter and CNN.
Yeah.
I mean, how weak are you? How little backbone, how little strength of character does Bob McCulloch have that his biggest challenge was people on Twitter? And you saw that in Ferguson, that whether it was the St. Louis County Sheriff's Department or the Highway Patrol, who were better, or the Ferguson police, that clearly their biggest challenge, because there were people at like past 11 o'clock at night in McDonald's writing stories. I mean, that is a challenge,
Exactly,
and you can't. Your
can't
tanks,
get a table
your
sometimes.
tanks can't do anything about that.
Yeah, that's
So
a
are
great
you
point.
gonna? So could we lay out? Are you gonna lay out what a prosecutor is supposed to do?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's listen to the last clip.
Here you have Bob McCulloch talking about the witnesses.
Many witnesses to the shooting of Michael Brown made statements inconsistent with other statements they made and also conflicting with the physical evidence. Some were completely refuted by the physical evidence, and several witnesses adjusted their stories in subsequent statements. Some even admitted that they did not witness the event at all, but merely repeated what they heard in the neighborhood or others or assumed had happened.
Wow, that literally again more defense counsel. That's
Yeah.
defense lawyer shit.
Yeah, you
right
can't trust
there.
these people.
You can't. These fucking people are all unreliable, and
Yeah, we don't know exactly who to trust, so let's not have a trial.
And yeah,
makes
let's
a lot
not
of
have a
sense.
trial. Exactly, you're supposed to have a trial. Go ahead, man.
Here's what we know now, is that they did this document dump, and because Robert McCulloch didn't want to take this case to the grand jury. He didn't want to do it. He's now 0 for 5 in getting indictments against police officers in St. Louis County who kill unarmed people. 0 for 5.
Yeah.
Now, for an indictment, not a conviction, for an indictment.
Indictments.
Indictment.
Wait, can I add one more stat to that really fast?
Sure.
So this is for St. Louis County. A total of 39 people were fatally shot by police officers between 2003 and 2012. According to the St. Louis Circuit Attorney's Office, only one of those was indicted since 2000, and that officer was acquitted.
Yeah,
so
and some of those
pretty sure thing that you'll be okay.
Right, yeah, and
that
again, of those 39, most of those guys, presumably, as most officer-involved shootings have, the person probably had a
justified.
weapon.
Yeah.
But these are talking about the 5 guys who didn't have a weapon, so they couldn't have shot back. Didn't have a gun.
Yeah.
So
Again, these cops aren't returning fire.
no, they're not returning.
They're
fire.
shooting first.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
These are shoot first at an unarmed person, ask questions later.